Madam Web is one of the strangest comic book movies in decades, specifically because of three letters, A-D-R. I remember seeing Madam Web for the first time. It was 3 p.m. on Valentine's Day, and I had just given my girlfriend the gift of not having to go with me. I drove to the theater, got a big old popcorn and a Coke Zero, and found myself in a room with maybe 10 other people. Makes sense. Midday for a movie with pretty negative reviews. And after far too many trailers, including this one with my new favorite trailer read.
Pues, your mother is dead.
Look at that ascot. I cannot wait. But anyway, the movie opens with Madam Web's mom, Mommy Web, in the Amazon researching spiders right before, well, I don't want to spoil it. A man shows up behind her. I could tell he was the film's villain, Ezekiel Sims, which if you know the comics is a strange choice, but whatever. He says,
"Do you think we're close?"
And Mommy Web says,
"They're almost impossible to find. No one's ever captured one alive."
And then something bizarre happened. Something I have never seen in a big budget movie like this. Sims walks closer to Mommy Web, out of focus but still very much visible, and we hear,
"I agreed to provide security for you because I thought you were close to finding the spider."
Except his mouth didn't move. I'll show you again.
"I agreed to provide security for you because I thought you were close to finding the spider."
This might not come through on a phone, but you see it on a TV, and you cannot miss it in a movie theater. And I looked around and I thought, am I having a stroke? What's going on? Little did I know, this was the beginning of a descent into madness that threatened to destroy everything I've built. I will say, I made a review after Madam Web was released and I said you shouldn't see it. And I still think that's true. I could never fully recommend someone spend 2 hours watching Madam Web when there are so many other movies and shows and videos and puzzles and naps you could be spending your time with. But I do think you should see this because I've never seen anything like it, if you've forgotten. Or enough time has passed that the next one of these has come and grabbed our attention, and this has disappeared into the ether like another morb in the wind. Madam Web was a 2024 superhero movie, directed by S.J. Clarkson and written by Clarkson, Matt Sazama, Buck Sharpless, and Claire Parker. It starred Dakota Johnson as the titular Cassie Webb, Sydney Sweeney as Julia Cornwall, Isabella Merced as Anya Corazon, Celeste O'Connor as Maddie Franklin, and Tahar Rahim as Ezekiel Sims. Madam Web and all the rest of the characters in this movie are from the Spider-Man side of the Marvel Comics universe, which means this is one of the weird ones made by Sony, and not the animated ones that are good, the live-action ones. This movie was originally thought to be set in the Sony Pictures universe of Marvel characters, or SPUMC, the universe that might contain Venom and Morbius. However, it has since been confirmed that Madam Web takes place in its own universe. Fun. When it was announced, fans were, to put it generously, skeptical. Madam Web, even more so than Venom and Morbius, is a character who does not make any sense when disconnected from Spider-Man, and if this was anything like those other two movies, we did not expect to see Spider-Man outside of maybe a misleading trailer shot. Madam Web's also not an incredibly consequential comic character. Like, yes, Madam Web has an important job, but I would be shocked if someone listed her in their top 25 favorite Spider-Man characters. If anything, Sydney's Julia Carpenter, here Cornwall, is probably the highest profile comic character in this movie, and she barely matters. Add on the fact that Sony was still reeling from being tricked by the internet into releasing Morbius twice, and Madam Web was off to a rough start. And after plenty of delays and reshoots, Madam Web premiered on February 14th, Valentine's Day of 2024. And the reviews were not good. It's currently rocking a solid 12% on review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, and it bombed so badly and so quickly that even the stars who were promoting the movie were taking shots at it. Sydney Sweeney started her SNL monologue with the joke,
"You might have seen me in Anyone But You or Euphoria. You definitely did not see me in Madam Web."
And this was March 2nd. Madam Web was absolutely still in theaters. This was unprecedented. And yeah, everything everybody said about Madam Web is true. It's boring, confusing, the performances are all over the place, the ending is a mess, the Spider-Man connections are bad. But also, there was one really weird problem that nearly every reviewer hit on. Something was going on with the dialogue. There were multiple moments, like the one I described earlier, where characters were speaking, but their mouths weren't moving. And there were plenty of times when the mouths were moving, but they didn't seem to match what the characters were saying. Shots lingered on the back of characters' heads, mouths were constantly obscured, and a lot of it just sounded strange, like different lines were coming from completely different recordings. So I decided that when Madam Web was released digitally, I would dig in, pour over every second of the movie to do three things. Find all the moments where the dialogue was doing something weird, do my best to figure out why each line ended up that way, and then use that to try to piece together what Madam Web looked like before all this mess. And before we get to specifics, I also want to say, having now watched this movie probably more times than anyone else on planet Earth, there are good parts. It isn't a full disaster. And even if it was, this video is not about making fun of the people behind the movie, besides maybe the executives, but I really want people to see this because it's so weird. However, before we get going, I want to say a couple of positive things about the movie. I actually like Dakota Johnson in the first half of the movie, before it goes off the rails. I think she's funny, her performance is very understated, but she just feels like a real person, which in a movie like this goes a long way. I think some of the effects are cool. Spider-Man but a monster movie is a neat concept. I like the three girls' costumes except Sydney Sweeney's exposed cheekbones, but besides that, they looked great for the minute they were on screen. I enjoy a nice Pepsi, and Mountain Dew, especially Baja Blast. I like Uncle Ben Wyatt, not the character, but I'm happy to see the actor here. I like Mike Epps. Again, not the character, but just in general, I'm happy he got paid. Also, fun fact, he was in 50 Shades of Black, the 50 Shades of Grey parody made by Marlon Wayans. I wonder if he and Dakota Johnson ever talked about it on set. I hope so. So there, some praise. Next, I want to real quick recap the story so you know what I'm talking about. And right off the bat, a lot of it won't make sense, but trust me, these things happen. Mommy Webb, played by Carrie Bechet, is pregnant and researching spiders in the Amazon right before she dies. She finds a rare spider that may be able to give people superpowers. Ezekiel Sims, played by Tahar Rahim, her bodyguard, shoots everyone, including Mommy Webb, and takes the spider for himself because he used to be poor or something. Then a tribe of spider people called Las Arañas, who live in the Amazon, take Mommy Webb to their pool, give her a magic spider bite, she gives birth to Cassie, and then she dies in the Amazon, just having researched spiders. Cut to 2003 New York. Cassandra Webb, played by Dakota Johnson, is a 30-ish-year-old EMT working with Ben Parker, played by Adam Scott. Cassie makes a joke about Ben getting shot in Queens. Love it. Cassie almost hits a skateboarding teen, played by Celeste O'Connor. Back at the hospital, Cassie gives Ben a delicious Mountain Dew Code Red, and a little boy tries to thank Cassie for saving his mom, and she absolutely cannot handle this, even though presumably she's a good driver, so this probably happens a lot. The family also includes a youngish girl played by Sydney Sweeney. Her dad doesn't like her. Cassie and Ben have lunch. Ben tells Cassie that he's met someone. We never hear the name, so it could be anyone. I don't know what's going on with names in this movie. It's like they don't have the rights to the characters, so they frequently almost say the names but don't. It's weird. Cassie gets a blank fortune cookie. Ben jokes that they need to find a new Chinese place because their printer must be broken, suggesting that he thinks Chinese takeout restaurants make their own fortune cookies from scratch. I don't think that's how it works. Cassie jaywalks home because the rules don't apply to her. She's wearing her signature red leather coat from the comics that's actually associated with another character, this one. But hey, when you Google Madam Web, this image comes up and it looks pretty cool, so whatever. At home, Cassie notices a teenager played by Isabella Marced is having trouble paying rent. At her apartment, Cassie gets a bowl of milk and a milk carton, in case we were confused, opens her window, and a cat enters who I assume has just been hanging out on the fire escape of Cassie's, I'm gonna say at least 4th story apartment. The cat drinks the milk, which is actually not good for cats, but hey, this is a stray cat who lives in Manhattan. It probably usually eats cigarette butts and Metro cards. Cassie puts the drawing in a box with some of her mom's things, like journals about spiders and a picture of Mommy Webb taking a picture. Who took that picture? Probably Las Arañas. Then, Cassie and Ben go to rescue someone from a car that's dangling off a bridge. They save the man, but while Cassie is still in the car, it teeters off the bridge and falls into the river. There, Cassie sees a bunch of visions of stuff from later in the movie, including a balloon, some blood, a bird, fireworks, and a big letter S. Does the S stand for Spider-Man? Maybe. Ben saves Cassie. He checks her vitals, but she believes she has deja vu, which she and Ben shrug off, even though you gotta assume that's brain damage, right? Or not. It's 2003, I guess we didn't know. Then we see Ezekiel again. This time he is fancy and at an opera because he's the bad guy. He meets a woman who goes home with him. He has a spider in his apartment. Ezekiel has a dream where the 3 girls Cassie saw earlier, wearing spider costumes, steal Ezekiel's spider, which they shouldn't need if they already have superpowers, but whatever. Then the girls throw him out a window, and his hair is white in the dream. Ezekiel wakes up and tells the woman he just met that every night he has a vision where 3 girls kill him and he's going to use Patriot Act era surveillance technology to find them. Ezekiel reveals the woman works for the NSA and this was a whole plan. He kills the woman and steals her passcode. Cassie wears her signature red coat to a barbecue baby shower for Ben's sister Mary. Ben gives Cassie a delicious Pepsi. Cassie gets roped into doing baby shower stuff. She's bad at it. They tease the baby's name, but they don't say it because again, this movie is weird about names. Cassie has more deja vu. Cassie and the rest of the EMTs employees respond to a fire at the local fireworks factory where Cassie has more deja vu. Her boss, O'Neill, played by Mike Epps, dies in a crash Cassie foresaw. Very sad, Pepsi. Ezekiel is back at home. He set up a bunch of monitors for his assistant, I guess named Amaria, played by Zosha Mamet. She uses the NSA technology to de-age Ezekiel's absolutely dead-on descriptions of the girls from the dream. The computer gives back a picture of a blank face, Sydney Sweeney, and Celeste O'Connor, but with shorter hair for some reason. Cassie goes to the doctor, but there's nothing wrong with her. She goes home and watches A Christmas Carol, not the Muppet one, another one, because Cassie is clearly dealing with the effects of brain damage. Ben asks Cassie to come to O'Neill's funeral. A bird flies into Cassie's window and then dies, but Cassie has deja vu, and the second time around, she opens the window so the bird survives. Cassie wears her signature red coat to the funeral, but before she gets there, encounters the 3 girls at Grand Central Station. Cassie then has a vision of the girls being murdered by Ezekiel, so they leave the train and head for the subway, where they find Ezekiel again, but in a knockoff Spider-Man costume. He kills quite a few cops, but the girls and Cassie escape by stealing a yellow cab. The girls introduce themselves as Julia Cornwall, Anya Corazon, and Maddie Franklin. Because the police believe, I guess, Cassie killed all those cops herself, she is forced to take the girls to the New Jersey woods and hide. The girls bicker and realize they have all met Cassie before, so they must be connected. Cassie tells the girls that she has precognitive powers, but they don't believe her. Cassie leaves the girls in the woods while she returns to the city in the stolen yellow cab, but don't worry, she takes the plates off so no one will suspect a thing. At home, Cassie finds her mother's journals and reads up on Las Arañas. She finds a picture of Mommy Webb and the man, Ezekiel. Who took this picture? No idea. The girls get hungry, so they leave the forest in search of a diner. They order everything on the menu, which at a New Jersey diner is like 300 things. A man sees the girls and calls the police. The call is intercepted by Ezekiel. Then the girls see some boys, so Maddie and Julia dance on the table for the boys. Not a particularly sexy dance either, just like being on the table and moving. Anya joins and the dancing somehow gets worse and the table somehow does not break or fall over. Ezekiel shows up in his Spider-Man costume and kills the girls. Then Cassie shows up and Ezekiel kills her, but she goes back to before that encounter like in the trailer, and instead of trying to beat Ezekiel in a fight by anticipating his movements, Cassie plows her taxi through the diner and hits Ezekiel. Everyone leaves. The girls hide at a motel. They share their sad backstories and then they all go to sleep in one bed. Cassie has a dream or something where she talks to Ezekiel and he tells her to give him the girls because they're going to kill him. Cassie says no. Then she teaches the girls CPR before leaving for Peru. Ben comes and picks up the girls. Cassie somehow travels to Peru by airplane, even though Ezekiel knows who she is and has all of the surveillance technology known to man, and it is 2003. In Peru, Cassie finds one of Las Arañas who explains the first scene to Cassie. Then Doctor Strange pushes Cassie into the pool where her mom gave birth, and Cassie learns that her mom was researching spiders in the Amazon right before she died because during pregnancy, Cassie was diagnosed with a neuromuscular disorder.
But I don't have a neuromuscular disorder.
I know, so I guess it worked and her mom actually loved her. Back in Queens, the girls are being incredibly nonchalant about everything considering they were just almost assassinated by a superhero twice. When Mary's water breaks, which means she's having the baby. The girls not only join Ben and Mary on their trip to the hospital, but Maddie calls shotgun, so Mary has to squeeze into the back. Maddie is caught on camera, which she would not have been if she were sitting in the back, but them's the shotgun rules. Ezekiel goes after the girls. Cassie somehow returns to America by plane without alerting Ezekiel and drives the stolen yellow taxi cab that is missing its license plates and clearly crashed into a building to Ben's house. When she sees EMTs and no Ben or girls, she figures they're on their way to the hospital, so Cassie jumps back into her stolen yellow taxi cab. No, scratch that, she steals an ambulance. Ezekiel almost kills everyone using a hand grenade, something he apparently has, but Cassie manages to crash her ambulance into him midair like The Rock in Furious 7. The kids join Cassie in the ambulance and they drive around electrocuting Ezekiel and throwing him into a third car. Cassie has one last vision and comes up with a plan to, I guess, die in the Pepsi fireworks factory from earlier. So she and the girls take a bunch of flares and set off all the fireworks, which Cassie is able to dodge because she can see the future. The helicopter that might have rescued them gets hit by a firework, and all the girls fight Ezekiel like in the dream, but they don't have powers or gadgets, so he knocks them all onto beams. Cassie uses web powers to help all the girls up at once. Then she tricks Ezekiel into getting crushed by the Pepsi sign, and not by the S from the vision, by the P. Cassie falls into the river and gets beamed by a firework, but is saved by the girl. Mary has the baby, which never gets a name. Cassie suggests that she knows Mary is going to die, but says nothing because she's one of those Spider-Verse fascists, I guess. Also, Cassie is blind and paralyzed, like in the comics. The girls hang out with Cassie now, or maybe live there. Julia goes to the fridge and gets Pepsi, but this time in glass bottles. They all pose in their costumes. The end. So, okay, that's the movie. And on its face, not great. You can probably see where some of the big issues cropped up, but it's the smaller issues that fascinate me, and the one I want to focus on in this video is Madame Web's astounding amount of ADR. But before we go any further, you may be wondering, what is ADR? Well, ADR, or Automated Dialogue Replacement, is a process where, after filming is done, actors re-record dialogue. And like Dan Olsen said in his video about the snowman, there's nothing wrong with ADR. Pretty much every movie uses some. However, how much a movie uses and why do sometimes tell you something about the movie. It's the same as reshoots. Not all movies with reshoots are bad, but many bad movies have a lot of reshoots. And as far as I can tell, there are three main reasons why a studio uses ADR. First, the quality of the original recording just may not be very good. Maybe they filmed on the streets of Manhattan and the background sound drowned out all the actors. Or maybe the mics were broken. Or maybe the audio got deleted by accident. But if there was some problem with the original recording, ADR can be used to fix it. Second, sometimes ADR is used to clarify something. Like, let's say there's a scene that establishes a main character that for whatever reason ends up being cut. The director may want to add a line using some creative editing where a character says a piece of crucial information from the cut scene, maybe over footage of something else, maybe over the back of a character's head. Or maybe if they're really ambitious, they'll take a shot of the actor saying something else and try to match it to a completely different set of words. Why do that specifically? I don't know, but it happens. We'll get to it. And then third, sometimes ADR is used to change something. So if a part of the movie is rewritten, maybe a scene is added, or a detail about a character is changed, an actor may need to record a completely new line and then it gets inserted into the original footage over a shot of the back of someone's head or something. It's similar to the second reason, clarification. Big difference, what they're ADRing was not originally the plan. It is something they decided on after the fact. So the three reasons a studio may want to use ADR: to repair, to clarify, or to change. Let's look at that first scene again. Now, I don't think this line about providing security was about repairing anything, since there wouldn't be anything to repair since his mouth does not move. Also, so much of this actor's lines specifically end up being ADR that it doesn't seem like a one-off, like, oh, a bird made a noise and the mic picked it up sort of thing. Is this here to clarify something? Yeah, maybe. Ezekiel's relationship to Mommy Webb is a little confusing. He could be a hired guide or a benefactor or a fellow scientist, and knowing which could give you important context about the rest of the movie. Is he already rich? Is he a friend of Mommy Webb? Does he understand what the spider will do? So adding a line with his job makes sense. However, I could also see a version of this script where Ezekiel had a different relationship to Mommy Webb. Oh, and by the way, I know what this character's name is. It's Constance. But that's enough like Cassie that I am bound to confuse the two names, so we're going with Mommy Webb, at least for the beginning. But yeah, maybe in an earlier version of the movie, Ezekiel was also a scientist that worked with Mommy Webb. That would make the betrayal way more personal. Hell, maybe he's even her dad. We never get information about Daddy Webb, but maybe that was a plot point that was cut. So adding a scene about how he's just providing security, which I still don't completely understand. Is he paying for the security or is he the security? But whatever, adding that line suggests they are not friends or fellow scientists. This is a simple business relationship. But you may also ask, well, why not just reshoot scenes like this? Because, and we haven't really talked about this, we know Sony rewrote, reshot, and re-recorded much of Madame Web. Dakota Johnson has even said it in interviews. According to The Wrap, when asked about the original script, Johnson said, "There were some dramatic changes," and she laughed and said, "I can't even tell you what they were." So there was clearly work done after the fact, but why is it so messy? Why is there so much ADR instead of just reshot footage? Sure, it's harder to do, but it also tends to look better. At a minimum, it wouldn't deserve a half-hour YouTube video. At most, 15 minutes. Well, the why comes down to a question of time, budget, and availability. First of all, Madame Web moved around a lot on the release calendar. Originally, it was scheduled to come out on July 7th, 2023, and then October 6th of that year, and finally February 14th of 2024. It's unclear exactly why the movie was pushed back, although January and February do tend to be where studios drop the movies they are less than thrilled about, so maybe they expected it to flop. It could also have moved back because Sony wanted to reshoot and re-edit parts of the movie, and they needed more time. Very possible. But that brings up another potential issue. Money. It was reported that Madame Web had a budget of roughly $80 million. Feels about right. After all, Dakota Johnson and Sydney Sweeney are pretty big stars, and while I would not say it looks incredible, the effects are decent and there are plenty of big expensive explosions. But in their article, Inside Sony's Madame Web Collapse, Forget About a New Franchise, Pamela McClintock and James Hibbard say that, quote, "It has been widely reported that Madame Web cost $80 billion, but the actual number is in the low $100 million range according to several sources. One explanation for that discrepancy could be the cost of reshoots. They usually end up adding about $5 to $10 million to the overall budget, but in some cases it can be pretty extreme. For example, World War Z's extensive reshoots apparently cost $40 million. But at a certain point, studios need to consider the fact that this movie might be destined to flop no matter how much is reshot. Perhaps some fundamental issue will always keep the movie from connecting with audiences. So it's possible that Sony spent a fair amount on reshoots but eventually decided they weren't worth it and certain scenes just didn't get reshot. Instead, they got the far less expensive ADR. And the third concern that didn't really cross my mind originally is availability. Maybe Sony wanted to reshoot scenes but couldn't work out the scheduling. I only say I didn't originally consider this because the biggest casualty of ADR is very clearly Tahar Rahim's Ezekiel Sims, but he doesn't strike me as a scheduling problem considering around the time Madame Web would be reshooting, Sydney Sweeney could also be working on Immaculate or Anyone But You, Dakota Johnson had Daddy-O, Isabel Merced had Migration and Alien Romulus, and Celeste O'Connor had Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. So would Tahar Rahim's schedule have stood out in this crowd? Apparently it could have, because Rahim was the third lead in that Napoleon movie that Brian Cox would have done a much better job with. And in an effort to capitalize on the local architecture, Napoleon filmed largely in the UK and Malta. So maybe Sony just couldn't get Rahim back and ADR was the best they could do. So what do you do instead? Well, one solution could involve asking the actor to record new lines of dialogue and then tasking some editors with the Sisyphusian task of using existing footage to fit the new dialogue into the movie. And when the editors don't have a lot to work with, this becomes painfully noticeable. So I want to take a trip to an old Nandovi Movies location that used to be my couch but is now a different part of the office, the Aculose Zone. Welcome back to the Aculose Zone. If you've forgotten, the Aculose is the magic acorn in the Artemis Fowl movie that was very clearly added late in the game to replace the pots of gold from the book. You looked at every time a character said the word Aculose and figured out how many were on and how many were off screen. The final count was quite telling. But I wanted to do something different here. Instead of focusing on an object, I want to focus on a character, Ezekiel Sims. Here is every line Ezekiel says off screen. Oh, hold on a second. Is that a Mountain Dew Baja Blast, the official drink of summer? Don't mind if I do. Tropical. Anyway, here is every line Ezekiel says off screen. Let's see if any patterns emerge. Well, what have we here? 4 separate instances of Ezekiel talking about his wealth, and 3 of them involve almost the exact same phrase, "The girls will destroy me and everything I've built." But Nando, you may be asking, what did Ezekiel build? A business? Some sort of criminal empire? It's an especially strange line because, according to Ezekiel, also mostly off screen, the girls are going to kill him. Feels like that's more than enough of a concern. Don't really need to justify it any further. And also, destroy me is so vague. Why not kill? The dream is pretty clear about what's happening. Also, in blue, we have 2 references to Ezekiel's humble beginnings. He came from nothing, which is made somewhat redundant by Ezekiel's insistence on constantly saying he built everything, but whatever. We have established a narrative that it seems the ADR was concerned with reinforcing. Ezekiel used to be poor, which is why he stole the spider, and he used it to build wealth, maybe some sort of company or something, and he doesn't want that destroyed. Which is a little weird because there's a pretty big logical gap I think you see in that story. How did stealing the spider make Ezekiel rich? He didn't sell the spider. He clearly got superpowers from the spider, but then what? How does that translate to building an empire? Is he an acrobat? A mob enforcer? Does he clean windows no one else can clean? Usually in a movie, the villain is a character. He has wants, needs, flaws, and they don't always need to be completely sketched out, but we can at least see the outline. So much work is done with ADR to tell us next to nothing about Ezekiel, which leads me to believe that originally there was dialogue that did explain Ezekiel's deal. Maybe he was a businessman, or maybe he was a rival scientist, or maybe he was Mommy Webb's husband. But whatever that is, for some reason it was removed and we were left with nothing. And you can't really go to the comics for any help because Ezekiel barely resembles his comic counterpart. In fact, I cannot for the life of me understand why the villain of this movie is Ezekiel Sims. Now, I'm not a humongous Spider-Man fan. For me, it goes X-Men, Guardians, She-Hulk, Daredevil, Avengers, and then probably Spider-Man. That being said, I know Ezekiel Sims is mostly a good guy. Sure, he tried to kill Peter that one time, but he felt bad about it. And he doesn't wear a Spider-Man suit, and he cannot see the future. So where did they get all that from? And I'm looking into some other similar characters, and I stumble upon the name that Spider-Man fans have been screaming at their phones or TVs or whatever for the last minute or two. Kane. Because this is Kane, right? Before you say anything, yes, I know Kane is a clone of Peter Parker, so he would not look like this and definitely would not exist before Peter. I'm not saying that this version of Ezekiel maps perfectly to Kane, but aesthetically, look at the costume. Red and black suit, red eyes. As far as I can tell, he's the only character that looks like this, outside of a very recent redesign for Miles. Kane can also sort of see the future, and he also has a superpower that no other spider person, especially Ezekiel, has, called the Mark of Cain, which is a burning touch. So like maybe this is not technically Kane, but it might as well be. It's as much Kane as Ezekiel. And the reason I think it's worth mentioning is because as I was reading up on Kane, I happened upon a sentence that stood out to me. Near the beginning of his Wikipedia, you see, later flashback scenes reveal that Kane worked as a bounty hunter for a time, being briefly dispatched to eliminate Kraven the Hunter. Kane also experienced a vision via his enhanced spider sense that Kraven would kill him in the future. So I said, sounds pretty similar to the plot of Madam Web. What story is this from? And apparently this is part of a Spider-Man arc called The Grim Hunt. It runs from Amazing Spider-Man 634 to 637. They were released in 2010 and were written by Joe Kelly with art by Michael Lark, Stefano Guardino, Matt Hollingsworth, and Joe Caramagna. Each issue also featured a short Kraven story written by J.M. DeMatteis with art by Max Fuimara, Fabio Daria, and Joe Caramagna. Basic premise of the story. Kraven the Hunter has been dead for a while, and his family wants to bring him back to life. To do this, they determine they need the blood of spider people, so they start hunting Spider-Man and a bunch of his allies. The story begins with a nearly dead Kane appearing at Peter's apartment and warning him of the grim hunt. Throughout the story, Peter, Kane, and a bunch of spider friends fight the Kravenovs in an attempt to rescue the couple of spider people the Kravenovs have already captured. Can you guess the identities of the 4 other spider people featured prominently in this book? I'll give you a hint. They're all women. That's right. This is one of the only non-Big Ol' Spider-Verse crossover Spider-Man stories featuring Madam Web, Julia Carpenter, Anya Corazon, and Maddie Franklin. Ezekiel Sims also shows up, but spoilers, it isn't actually him. It's Kraven's half-brother Chameleon pretending to be Ezekiel. And yes, in the Kraven flashback stories at the end of the book, Kane has a vision that Kraven is going to kill him, which he does by the end of the main story. So yeah, Madam Web is sort of based on a comic. Maybe not based on, but it borrows a bunch of elements from it. So while the character in Madam Web is named Ezekiel and has a lot of money and doesn't wear shoes, he's way more in common with Kane. The costume, the precognition, the Mark of Cain, and the meeting your destiny on the path you take to avoid it prophecy storyline. At best, it's a fusion of Sims and Kane. So what does this matter? Well, there's some concept art that's gone public since Madam Web's release, and one image specifically confused me. It appeared to be the inside of a casino. But the Madam Web we saw does not have any scenes set in a casino. So what was originally supposed to happen there? This is just a guess, but maybe that's where Ezekiel made his fortune. Spider powers typically include superhuman reaction time, and Kane sometimes has short-term clairvoyance. So maybe Ezekiel's fortune came from hitting Atlantic City and playing the slots. Maybe he could spider power his way to some jackpots. I know next to nothing about gambling, but I googled slot machines and one of the first results that came up was a Lord of the Rings themed machine with a $1.2 million grand prize. Ezekiel gets one of those and he is set. He can invest it or go back to different machines and turn it into a small fortune. Perhaps something like that was originally in the cards but was cut. Perhaps because the shoot was expensive, or maybe it hurt the flow of the movie. Who knows? But if it was cut, it would certainly explain why Ezekiel needs to keep saying that he has a lot of money and he's paying Amaria a fortune. Because he's already said that he didn't grow up rich in the first scene, but now he's in this penthouse with a guy in a chair, so audiences may wonder, what happened? Now, do I think just throwing in a few off-screen lines about having built an empire fixes that issue? No, but maybe someone thought it did. You know what else was weird about Madam Web? The second act. Specifically the second half of the second act where Cassie takes a quick trip to Peru. It doesn't make any sense, and like it gets set up a little bit, but not as much as you would expect. Cassie explains the situation to the girls. Anya says,
You're leaving.
Cassie sighs and said,
I have to go and figure out what is going on.
Julia very smartly asks,
How?
and Anya says,
You have to go to Peru.
end of scene. Did you notice it? Anya's mouth does not match what she's saying. I know it's very easy to miss, but watch the Peru line again.
You have to go to Peru.
And maybe you're thinking, well, how do you know? That looks close enough. It does. Until you realize that shot is another angle of the line where Anya says,
You're leaving.
and if you play the audio from the first line over the video from the second, it becomes undeniable.
You're leaving.
So wait, they recycled a different angle of Anya to add a line about Peru? That's weird, but like, who cares? ADR is usually for little changes. They did not just mess around with a couple lines and add a trip to Peru. And it's clearly such an important part of the story that it had to have been there the entire time. Like, characters talk about it. The Las Arañas guy says Cassie will come back to Peru and he will meet her there. Well, I mean, he actually, well, he kinda says that. We hear that line and we see his mouth move, but between some weird editing and all kinds of blurs and flashes and stuff, he gets obscured, like a Rob Liefeld character's feet. Just enough that we don't actually know what he said from the beginning. We just infer. But maybe that's ADR too. Now that I think about it, Cassie does not tell Ben where she's going on screen. She says,
I'll be gone a week.
behind the car, then talks about going somewhere, but that could just be her apartment, and she leaves the girls with Ben because she's worried they'll get spotted in Manhattan. So wait a second, was the entire trip to Peru added after the fact? I think it might have been. After all, it makes no sense practically. Cassie cannot leave the country by plane without Ezekiel's security system noticing. And also it just kills the flow of the movie. A trip here for flashbacks we mostly already knew or could have guessed. And then what can we take from that? Well, a lot of what we get from the Peru trip may also not be from the original script. And that also makes sense. Like, the Peru trip is where Cassie gets the clearest explanation of her powers, again, largely through voiceover. But this be in 3 places at once thing feels like it comes out of nowhere. And as far as I know, is not one of Madame Web's comic powers. And it's incredibly underwhelming in the final cut. So maybe that's because it was also a late addition. If the Peru trip was not part of the original script, a lot of the ending of the movie falling apart starts to make sense. Because like I said, I didn't hate the first half. But near the end, the wheels come off the car, and this could explain why. You want to know something else that I find very interesting? Ezekiel never says the sentence, "The girls will kill me," on screen. He says someone will kill him, and he recognized the girls' faces, although he says a lot of that also in ADR. Like, this whole bit where they're talking about the girls could easily be a different scene that was repurposed. When a movie like this gets filmed, the screens are always blank and the graphics are added in after the fact, so they could be looking at anything here. And it's all back ahead stuff. All you need to do is have Zosha Mamet come back to add these lines, and then boom, you have a completely different scene. But wait, so then who kills Ezekiel? Mike Epps? This lady? Perhaps. But also, here's my theory with this one. It certainly seems like at one point Spider-Man fought Ezekiel. Which Spider-Man? This is where it gets tricky. There were rumors popularized by John Campea that originally Madame Web was going to take place in the Andrew Garfield-verse, but that was changed, and then Tom Holland's Spider-Man was going to appear, although it didn't seem like it would have been in the MCU either way, but like a copy that just has that Spider-Man. Campea claims that the change was part of why Madame Web needed so many reshoots. Even though the Spider-Man changed, the production team never changed the time period the movie took place in. And if a big plot point of the movie involves Peter Parker's birth, a movie set in the Garfield-verse would need to take place in the late 90s, since, according to the wiki, that Peter was born in 1995. But in Far From Home, we see MCU Peter's passport, and Tom Holland's Spider-Man was born in 2001. So according to Campea, his source said the reshoots were to change everything from 1995 stuff to 2001 stuff. I don't buy this for a few reasons. First, the movie takes place in 2003, so that's not either of those years. And then second, I think director S.J. Clarkson's explanation for why this wasn't true makes sense. A movie set in 1995 and a movie set in 2001 are not that far apart. And if you were originally planning for 1995, it's not that unbelievable that people are still wearing shirts from 6 years ago. I have shirts that are decades old, so I don't think Sony would be so interested in getting all the fashion right that they'd reshoot big parts of the movie. That's just my guess. However, we know that a Spider-Man was originally in Madame Web because recently concept art came out featuring Tom Holland's Spider-Man fighting Ezekiel. What are they doing in the airspace over New York? I have no idea. I guess Ezekiel can fly too. why not? But I bet a fight between Spider-Man and Ezekiel was in the movie at some point, but was eventually removed. So hold on. Does that mean the girl's relationship with Ezekiel might have been different in the original script? Like, if Spider-Man killed him, what were the girls doing? That could explain why so much of what Ezekiel says about the girls specifically ends up being off-screen or ADR. Maybe they had a similar role, but factored into the story in a slightly different way, but when Spider-Man got taken out of the movie, they needed to be repurposed and they took his spot, which meant all of the lines talking about Spider-Man killing Ezekiel had to go. Maybe. Again, this is almost all speculation. Like, I would say it's fair to say it's not speculation that so much of this movie has ADR, and there's probably a reason for why, but I don't know exactly why. But until one of you heroes sends me the original script from Madam Web, you just kind of got to work with what we got. One other thing I find kind of strange about the Ezekiel dialogue, he brings up so many times that he got the technology for Amaria, which I have to assume he's always been in the script, right? Like, he has to have had that technology, otherwise how was he finding these girls? So everything in yellow is Ezekiel yelling at Amaria, telling her she's doing a bad job, he got her this technology and he's going to destroy her. And I just think that's weird because this is all added into the story and yet doesn't go anywhere. There's no resolution. Amaria doesn't have any second thoughts, even though we keep lingering on her as she thinks about what Ezekiel's doing and how he's treating her. So I guess my question is, why bother adding that at all? See, it kind of reminds me in Blue Beetle of Susan Sarandon's relationship with Harvey Guillen, except in that movie, Susan Sarandon is not as explicitly evil in the beginning. She doesn't say, kill Jaime, that kid who we don't like. So we, the audience, go on that journey with Harvey as he learns that his boss is evil. However, from Amaria's first scene, she knows that Ezekiel's planning to kill a bunch of children, and she doesn't like it. But why do we bother spending time with that information? And like, I could see a version of this movie where Ezekiel is nice to Amaria, and it's like, oh, this guy, he seems cool, but actually he's killing children. But I don't know, they just really don't do anything with this character. I'm not saying we need to start the hashtag justice for Amaria. I'm just saying it's weird that it keeps coming up here. Before we get to the end, I do want to point out some other strange moments that didn't really fit into a larger narrative, but are worth mentioning. The line read I have the hardest time understanding comes with the NSA woman's death. Sims has given her the death touch and told her that he will let her die if she doesn't give up the password to her surveillance technology. She hesitates, but after more pressure, she gives Ezekiel the code. Except, and again, I cannot figure this one out, she appears to say another line before the code, or the code has more letters, because for a few seconds she is clearly saying something, but no words are happening.
Q920.
I guess maybe she said something specific about a cut plot point, but they needed to use this take, and by this point they didn't assume any of us would notice, but we noticed. Here's another weird moment, although I think I know what they were going for with this one, I just don't think it works, especially considering all these other problems. When everyone from the party is responding to the fire at the fireworks factory, Cassie has her third moment of deja vu. And like the other two moments, there's a loud noise and we just start the scene again with a confused Cassie. And everyone does the same thing they originally did, including Cassie, who reminds Ben to check a patient's abdomen. And this just happens in front of us. Except when it does, Cassie doesn't say it.
Wait, check his abdomen.
And internal injuries, good catch.
Which doesn't really gel with how these flashbacks have worked so far. If anything, you expect she wouldn't say anything because of the shock. Ben would bring the patient to the ambulance, and Ben would inadvertently injure the patient by touching his abdomen. Then Cassie would say, I thought you checked his abdomen, and Ben would be confused and the scene would move forward. But I don't know, for whatever reason, they decided not to do that. And this one isn't even an ADR thing, but I just love it too much. During the big fight at the fireworks factory, the ground beneath Anya crumbles and she falls, leaving her dangling from the roof. And when Cassie sees this, she yells, and this is the real cut they went with, Anya! Which I have to assume is a nod to everyone's favorite Marvel movie, Captain America and the Winter Soldier.
Don't say it. Don't you say it.
Anya!
Left. Come on!
But one other thing. I want to talk about another non-dialogue weirdness before we get to what I think was the original story. It's a strange shot that comes in late in the third act. Cassie and the girls are on the roof of the exploding fireworks factory. Ezekiel appears and each girl tries to fight him individually. Maddie, very radically, shreds down this rail and then hits Ezekiel. He catches her and tosses her off the roof, but Maddie lands on a beam, and she lands a lot like Spider-Man. Now I've got three theories for this one. One, they just rendered it weird. 2, the girls initially had powers by this fight. Or the most likely option, 3, this was originally someone else. If the concept art of Ezekiel fighting Spider-Man is to be believed, it means previs of that fight between Ezekiel and Spider-Man probably existed long before filming was done. If this was anything like how these movies get put together, it was largely planned out before any footage was shot. That's just how these go. But if that's the case, I could see Sony saying, well, we're not letting this go to waste, and that's why Maddie moves like Spider-Man in one shot. So what's the point of all of this? Analyzing individual words of Madam Web. It's madness. But I do think now that we know what may not have originally been in Madam Web, it's possible to fill in those blanks using concept art and comic history and story structure and just common sense and see a version of Madam Web that almost works. Now, to be clear, I don't think this would have turned it into some kind of Dark Knight or Logan or Guardians 3 level masterpiece, but I do think we'd have a movie on the same level as like Ant-Man 2 or Venom. A decent watch that isn't going to change your life but also isn't going to ruin your day. So here's my guess at what version 1 of Madam Web could have looked like. And no, this is not a rewrite or a small change or anything like that. It certainly may seem like it, but it is not. 1, because I said I wouldn't do it anymore because it may come off badly, but more importantly 2, I'm genuinely more trying to fill in these weird gaps like the Peru trip or Ezekiel's backstory. I'm not trying to improve the movie. If anything, I'm trying to get at some interesting ideas that the movie may have originally presented. Now, this could be way off, but it feels at least like some of these things had to have happened. Okay, beginning is largely the same. Ezekiel doesn't need to say the security line, he's going to do that later. At this point, the mystery is a plus. Who is this guy? Why does he want the spider? Constance Webb is shot, Las Arañas grab her, spider bites her, Constance gives birth to Cassie, dies, nothing about Cassie coming back to Peru later, just something about her destiny. 2003, almost all the beginning stays as is until Ezekiel's reintroduction. Cassie's an ambulance driver, Cassie falls into the river and gets Madam Web powers, but I'd also maybe add that we see Ezekiel in the underwater web future vision thing, perhaps in his spider suit, and this will get explained later, but I just think here it clears some things up. Ezekiel meets the NSA woman, they sleep together, he has the dream, but it's very different. This is the Spider-Man fight. Ezekiel dies the same ways in the original dream, wakes up, tells the woman about the dream. Someone is going to kill me, but important change, Ezekiel can't do anything about it because he can't see Spider-Man's face, but we will learn that when Cassie had her accident, it changed the web. What's the web? It's a cosmic spider web connecting everyone, and especially the spider people. And at the middle of it is this Spider-Man. But now, because of Cassie's accident, although he doesn't know that, Ezekiel can see more of the web. The 3 girls and a mystery woman who's sort of obscured or something. And these 3 girls are in plain clothes, no superhero outfits yet, and their strands are directly connected to Spider-Man. Ezekiel explains to the NSA woman that if he changes the web of destiny, those changes affect the rest of the web. And now that he knows who is near Spider-Man, Ezekiel believes he can kill these girls, severing their strands, and once those are gone, Spider-Man will become disconnected and cease to exist. It's dumb, but it's how these stories usually work. So Ezekiel kills the NSA woman and takes her passkey. No changes for a while until the next Ezekiel scene. Amaria is working for Ezekiel, but not using the NSA surveillance technology to unmask the girls. He saw their faces, so he gives that to Amaria and she is able to track the girls. And like in the original movie, she's a little conflicted about this, but goes with it. Everyone meets at the subway, Ezekiel attacks, but they all escape. Basically, the first half of Act 2 is also exactly the same. Subway, woods, diner, motel. We could do the CPR scene, but I think this also has to include some bit where the girls ask Cassie questions, and one of them is about the defibrillator. Because in the original movie, Anya just totally knows what that is, even though Cassie calls it an AED. Maybe it's just me, but I barely know the word defibrillator. I definitely don't know how to charge it up, so yeah, maybe there's a scene where she explains that. But anyway, then Ezekiel gets the info from Amaria about Cassie and realizes that Cassie Webb is the obscured woman in the web and reaches out to her using psychic powers. He tells Cassie that he wants to meet with her at his penthouse. She is wary but thinks she might be able to reason with him, so she gives the girls to Ben just to be safe and travels to Manhattan. Now, big change. At the apartment, Ezekiel explains his backstory. He worked with Constance, accidentally killed her. Yes, he killed some other people, but he didn't mean to kill Constance. Stole the spider, got powers, used them to become rich via gambling, became a philanthropist, funds spider research. We can even name drop some of the organizations he co-founded, like Oscorp or Alchemex. He explains that Cassie is also a spider person, so his resources could help her learn about her powers. Maybe Ezekiel even got another vision, which showed Cassie blind and wheelchair bound. Ezekiel says, if you try to protect protect these girls, bad things will happen to you. But if you work with me and change the web, not only will we be able to figure out your powers, those things won't happen to you. So Ezekiel shows her the spider, and as Cassie and Ezekiel both touch the spider at the same time, they see Mary, Ben, Julia, Anya, and Maddie on the way to the hospital. And Ezekiel puts together that Mary's baby is eventually going to be Spider-Man. That's why everybody's connected via this web. So now he's got a new plan. Kill Mary, and then he's good. Cassie says she won't let him. Ezekiel attacks Cassie. And out of all the things that didn't happen in this movie, this one feels like the biggest slam dunk. Amaria, the assistant who is also there and has been visibly less into the plan as the movie goes on, hears Cassie tell Ezekiel what he's doing is wrong and gets the courage to stand up to Ezekiel. He tells her she can't fight him, and she pulls out the gun from earlier and shoots Ezekiel in the arm or something. While he's hurt, Cassie, and here's another weird thing that never goes anywhere in the original movie, steals the spider, because otherwise why is it there? And Cassie has it at the end of the movie, so Cassie escapes as Ezekiel kills Amaria. Mary, Ben, and the kids are on their way to the hospital. Ezekiel uses its surveillance tech to figure out where they're going. Cassie, for the first time, actively uses her powers to learn where Ezekiel will meet the car. She comes up with a plan, sneaks into a hospital, perhaps the one she works at, and steals an ambulance and catches Ezekiel. Then, and this is the other thing that blows my mind, while Ezekiel is down, Cassie and two of the girls get Mary into the ambulance and drive her to the hospital. Because why else is it an ambulance? Of course, the pregnant woman is going to eventually ride in this ambulance, right? Ezekiel sees this and follows the ambulance because now, not only are Cassie and some of the girls in it, but also Mary and Spider Fetus, which means Cassie can leave Ben and one of the girls in the hoodie in the car and they're not in danger anymore because Ezekiel isn't after them, so those two just leave. And listen, if you wanted it, maybe you could have Ben tell Cassie that she doesn't need to do this, she's gonna get herself killed, and then Cassie can say something like, I have the power to stop him, it's my responsibility, and to leave. So then we get a little chase from Ezekiel's perspective. He's following the ambulance. We don't see too much of what's going on in the ambulance, but maybe Ezekiel is listening using his technology, or maybe he just has super hearing, so he can hear all the chaos in the ambulance. He gets close enough, opens the back door, and finds the three girls. But wait, where's Mary? And we cut to Ben driving Mary wearing Julia's hoodie to the hospital and getting there safely. Also, the girls electrocute Ezekiel. Ezekiel is angry and now determined to just kill the girls and Cassie, since it still might solve his problem and he hates them. Follows them to the fireworks factory, big fight. This whole being in three places thing is pretty dumb and also mostly comes from the Peru trip, so I'm gonna bet it wasn't in the original movie. Cassie recognizes the S from her dream and makes a new plan to kill Ezekiel. Cassie and the girls use the spider Cassie stole from Ezekiel to lure him onto the sign, and then Cassie sacrifices herself to kill Ezekiel and ends up in the water. The spider escapes, the girls save Cassie, the end. And if you want a post-credit scene, you can do a flash forward, and this is where you tease Cassie's new volunteer caretaker from the local high school, a girl named either Cindy Moon, Jessica Drew, or Mary Jane. So what have we learned? I'm gonna say not much. Sony's weird, Craven's in trouble. When actors' lips are not moving, there shouldn't be words happening, unless of course they're telepaths. Yes, all of those things. But also, movie making is a fascinating process. And even a movie that is not all that good can still provide you with almost an hour of entertainment, and that's great. So Sony, from the bottom of my heart I say, thank you. Now if you enjoyed this strange story about a weird movie, I've got another one for you. My next video is called That Netflix Movie That Everyone Watched by Accident, and it will be on YouTube eventually, but right now you can watch it on this video sponsor, Nebula. I am sure you guys know Nebula. It's a subscription streaming platform that I helped to create, along with a bunch of other YouTubers. There's plenty of other pop culture YouTubers that I'm sure you already watch. I just want to say, we've talked about it a bunch. If you have not been keeping up recently, I would say go check Nebula out again. The design has changed a lot in ways that are pretty cool. Like there's little subcategories now. So I am in culture. This is culture. Strong guy back there. He's part of culture. And then second, there's a lot of new programming that's coming. A lot of it came out in a Variety article, including a show called The Getaway that I've heard about and it looks very fun. Patrick Willems is working on a new short film that I'm very excited about. There's a lot of cool stuff happening at Nebula. And if I ever get it together and finish writing my short film, I'm sure there's a good chance Nebula is where it would go. So if you've ever thought about it before, this is a great time to join up. A yearly subscription to Nebula is about $50, but with the code NANDO at checkout, NANDO, you get a year subscription for just under $2.50 a month. It is an incredible deal. Go check it out, see what's there. I think you're gonna really enjoy it. As always, I've got to say thank you to everybody who continues to support the channel on Patreon, everybody that watches these videos early and ad-free on Nebula, everybody who listens to my podcast, mostly Nitpicking, everybody that follows me on Twitter. I'm Nando V Movies all over the internet. That's all I got. Stay safe. I'll see you next time.